Welcome back. One of the year's most hotly anticipated the movies, The Hobbit, is about to open in America. The story itself laid the groundwork for the hugely successful Lord of the Rings trilogy, which director Peter Jackson turned into a hugely successful film franchise. But as Ann Curry found when she visited Peter Jackson in New Zealand, this billion-dollar enterprise really started when a monster movie drove a little boy to tears.
Hitchcock's great quote about, some people's movies are slices of life, mine are slices of cake, that sums me up. I'm someone that can happily buy a ticket, go to a film, come away thinking, wow, that was cool. And so those are the sorts of films that I hope I'm making.
A big slice of cake, big chocolatey, with lots of frosting.
And quite a few calories.
You may not recognize his face, but you know his movies. Sir Peter Jackson, yes, he's a sir, is the creative genius behind King Kong and The Lord of the Rings. Now, a decade after he directed and co-wrote the Rings trilogy, comes the much-anticipated prequel, The Hobbit, filmed here in his native country, New Zealand.
Why did you fight so hard to keep the filming of this movie, The Hobbit, in New Zealand?
I've always wanted to make my films here. I just, regard myself as a New Zealand filmmaker. I don't really feel compelled to have to go somewhere else in order to do what I want to do.
We caught up with Jackson just before The Hobbit's world premiere.
It's the greatest privilege in the world to have your hobby be your profession. It's a gift, and I have to keep reminding myself of that when it's tough and tiring.
We got him to sit down and take a rare break.
Last night, I had a look at the movie for the first time as a complete, finished, run of a film.
Oh, what'd you think?
I thought it was okay. A few little tweaks to do today, though.
Still.
Yeah, this afternoon. Yeah.
And the premiere, as we speak, is tomorrow.
Yeah, well, it's tomorrow. It's not today, and that's the good news.
Why do you have this reputation for always changing all up into the last minute?
Because you can always make it better. I could happily work on The Hobbit for another 6 months, because it's never perfect. And so we just simply take every available minute, second, up until the time that the film has to be taken away from us.
And complicating his perfectionist tendencies, Jackson is having to follow the biggest success of his career. The Lord of the Rings broke box office records and earned him 3 Academy Awards. Did you feel a pressure to outdo yourself?
It's the thing that made me hesitant to do The Hobbit, is that I didn't want to find myself competing with a film I'd made earlier. What I ended up doing, I think, was embracing the fact that The Hobbit's a very different tone of story. It was written for children. It has a whimsy and a charm and a humour that doesn't exist really in The Lord of the Rings.
It was his own childhood in a small seaside community here called Pukerua Bay that shaped his future. Born in 1961 to English immigrants Joan and Bill Jackson, a housewife and a civil servant. He was an only child. At age 9, he woke up to the power of film when he found himself crying watching this scene in the original King Kong. What was it about King Kong that captured you in your imagination?
Well, it was just an enormous empathy for this innocent character taken from his home and dragged into 20th century civilization. The film affected me to the point that it was the time that I decided I want to do that.
So without any formal training, Jackson began making his own movies using a Super 8 camera that a neighbor gave his family. How did you figure out how to make a film?
You learn from watching other films, and then there was a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland. That magazine inspired more young, nerdy kids to become filmmakers than anything. George Lucas or Steven Spielberg or Jim Cameron, any of that, and many, many others. That magazine was responsible for warping a lot of young minds.
So reading that magazine, you came up with all kinds of ideas, and it sounds like your family had to suffer a great deal for your art.
Well, my mother had to give up her oven so I could cook foam latex monsters. Our little house that we lived in would have this horrific smell of sort of rubbery sulfur, vulcanized rubber in it for days after I did a bake in the oven.
A piece of his mom's fur coat became King Kong. His parents even let him drop out of high school to take a job to pay for film equipment.
That wouldn't be so bad.
Before long, he was making slasher films, starting with Bad Taste, where he and his friends made up the cast and crew. It became a cult hit.
Come on in for a cup of tea.
Followed by a dark comedy with puppets called Meet the Feebles, and a horror movie, Brain Dead. Throughout it all, his parents' support never wavered.
They were these incredibly gruesome splatter movies that I made when I was young. Those were the movies that my parents came to watch, and they somehow still managed to be very proud. They were unconditionally supportive. You feel a passion to do this, which in my case was rather odd. You know, make monsters and make little movies and cut them together and screen them on a sheet on my bedroom wall. And if you have parents that don't question it, that don't regard it as being odd or strange, don't make you feel like a weirdo, I think that's really important.
His breakout film was Heavenly Creatures, and his own version of King Kong was hugely successful. But the Rings trilogy really put him on the map. And you might have missed it, but Peter Jackson has had a cameo in every movie he's directed, from Bad Taste to King Kong and all of the Rings movies. Even his two kids, Katie and Billy, appear. In his latest film, Jackson plays a dwarf, but everyone who knows him says he's more of a hobbit. I understand there was a time when actually you did not like to wear shoes and would only wear really shorts on set.
Well, I still don't really wear shoes. I wore shoes today just for you. But the last 6 or 8 weeks I haven't worn shoes at work. It's been fantastic.
The person you don't see is Fran Walsh, Jackson's partner, who stays private to give their 2 children a normal life. They co-wrote all of the Rings and Hobbit movies with Philippa Boyens. But few know Walsh's influence, or that she wrote and directed one of the Rings' most iconic scenes, Gollum's schizophrenic conversation with himself.
They stole it from us. Master's my friend.
And it's probably the most famous scene in the film.
Nobody likes you.
So she should direct more movies, but I don't think she ever will. Yeah, I trust Fran more than I trust anyone else in the world.
With her by his side, he's built a movie-making empire in Wellington, now referred to as Wellywood, with special effects facilities, sound stages, and a state-of-the-art production house. It's here that Jackson pioneers what's called performance capture, which is how actor Andy Serkis brings Gollum to life. And even more so in The Hobbit, as we see in this exclusive clip.
Up, up, up it goes, and yet never grows.
What we've been able to do in the last intervening 10 years is build a lot more muscle systems for his face. And so basically what you're trying to do with performance capture is to allow every nuance of what Andy does to be accurately transferred to the Gollum puppet.
You smile, it's fun for you.
Yeah. It's creating an emotional character who's completely artificial.
Jackson invited us behind the scenes.
I recognize this scene.
Oh yes, the trolls.
And shared some secrets.
As he's moving, that's what's happening on the screen. How does that work exactly?
All of these guys are covered in these little dots. And the props are too. You can see that the spoon that he's got has got the points on as well. All of these dots are being photographed live by a series of cameras all around the room. And between them, all the cameras get together and have a discussion and figure out whose dots are who, and they kind of work it all out.
But how does he capture characters at vastly different heights? He invited me on screen to explain.
Oh, you want me to be Gandalf the Grey? Absolutely. One of my favorite characters. All right then, all right.
So Gandalf's standing there, and I'm Bilbo, and I'm standing here. So if I look at you directly, it's not going to work.
I see.
So what I have to do is if I look at the screen and I just point with my hand, and there I'm looking at, that's where your eyes are. So I just get a mark up on the ceiling up there. I can see where I go.
So your eyes are there.
Yeah. So that's
I'm looking
where
there.
Looking.
Wow. Well then this is tough on the actors.
So we're walking around and we're talking, and I'm glancing back up at you there, and you're going. I'm going past you here. Then now it gets confusing because we've got to turn all the way around, and now we're really in trouble. We're looking right the other way.
Where are we looking? Oh dear.
At the same time, a lot of the film is low-tech, literally low.
On the days that we haven't got time to do any of this, if you're a Gandalf, you get to stand on a box. And if I'm a hobbit, I get to be on my knees.
Oh no.
Yeah. If you go in behind Anne's shoulder and look down at me, that's exactly how we did. You know, like a lot of the film was done like this.
The Hobbit is in 3D, and it's the first film ever shot at 48 frames per second, a more realistic look that will be tested in some theaters. But while Jackson pushes technology, he doesn't forget his predecessors, early stop-motion animators. And look closely, he's holding the structure of the model used in the original King Kong in 1933.
So this is one of my most precious things that I own. And because the motion capture stage that we have here is just through the doors there, I wanted to make sure that everyone that comes into the stage is reminded of how animation began. The connection between me and that 9-year-old boy watching this movie in black and white on TV for the very first time, that connection is so close.
Maybe it's the boy in him, but he also owns the car from the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and a collection of working World War I planes. But none of that compares to what he has in his own backyard.
In films, you literally destroy the sets. I mean, they get smashed up and they get taken to the dump. Fran and I started to feel incredibly sentimentally attached to Bag End, so we approached the studio and we said, listen, can we keep the set, the hole inside of Bilbo's house? And they said yes, so we kind of dug a hole in a hill and we put the original Bag End set from The Lord of the Rings into the hill and covered it over with dirt, and it's kind of there, and it's our sort of guest house now.
Come on, come in!
Elijah Wood has stayed there.
Really?
Yeah. Ian McKellen stayed there.
It has a big round green door?
It's got the big round door. It's exactly as it is in the movie. It's got all the props from the film too. Of course, the difficulty came that when we had to recreate it for The Hobbit, we had to build a brand new one, because that one is stuck up in the hill there. We couldn't get it out. It was buried in the hill. So we had to recreate it again. And again, I felt so sentimental. We've got that one in storage too.
No.
Yeah, because I couldn't throw that one away either. Oh my God.
Action!
And why would he? After all, Peter Jackson has devoted a quarter of his life bringing J.R.R. Tolkien to the big screen.
By our count, you will have spent 14 years making these Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies.
Right, yeah.
Do you think you'll look back on these films, these 6 films eventually, as your greatest legacy?
Well, it's an interesting question, because obviously if I said yes, I'd be saying I'm assuming I'm never going to make anything that people regard with quite as good as that. But you know, the realistic question is that may well be the case.
What a great story. Our thanks to Ann Curry. We wanted to let you know Ann will interview the cast of The Hobbit tomorrow morning on Today. We're back with more right after this.